I want to make sure that people know what's going on. One of the things we've done, there's a weekly update memo that Logan gets about SAGE, and as you get those, Logan, I hope you'll share those with others so they get that information. We also do monthly webinars, and you can see on here the schedule of the webinars, and we record them. So you can go in and you can see and listen to every webinar we've done to this point. And you can see the ones that are coming. Because I know, most of you are busy, you're working, you're doing things. It's not always possible to participate at the very time that we give those. But all that information will be on the website. And then if you look down at the bottom, it gives the specific website, but I just go to assessment and click on SAGE, and it's pretty easy to do. We also have FAQs, and as we get questions, we try to give really good, clear answers, and then we post them on the website so everybody can benefit from the question and answer. So one of the things we're doing as we finish up, as I said, tonight's my last regional meeting, as we finish up with all these meetings, then we're going to try to articulate all of the questions that we've received during these regional meetings, and then we'll post a new FAQ up there. So when you look at the FAQs, we haven't done anything for a while because we've been so busy out on the road, but then you'll see some new ones coming up. Okay? So next thing I think is just a summary. Oh, I'm the one with the clicker, aren't I? Okay, the summary. Again, standards-based adaptive assessment. So excited about adaptive assessment, but keep in mind, everything is the way we've always done it. We've always used an out-of-state vendor. We've always had educators develop the test questions. We've always tried to keep people informed and trained on how to do it. That's the way we've always done it. Same way with our data. The way we manage our student data has not changed. It's not going to change. It's the way we've always done it for years and years and years. It's accessible, all those great accessibilities, the immediate reporting, immediate results. We're so excited about that extensive reporting. And then having those links to formative material for teachers, I hope will be a great support, a great help to teachers, something that you haven't had in the past. Okay, questions about SAGE. Right back of the room.
So, I want the best thing for the teacher because that's who's teaching my children, of course. How many of you are teachers? I think there's a lot of you. Raise your hand, don't be shy. Anybody else? Let's give a round of applause for that. The question is, with all the groups, this bias and sensational or whatever.
Bias and sensitivity.
Yeah, so I don't see a more appropriate person than my child's teacher to make that determination. Are they going to be aware of all of the different questions on that assessment for my child? Is that my child's teacher, are they going to be aware of the questions?
You bet. Your teacher will be aware, that's part of what we're doing now is making sure teachers are educated, they know everything that's going on. Teachers will have access to all these sample items. Teachers will have access to all of the, what did I call them, practice tests. We're going to have lots of practice tests. So you bet teachers will have access to all that.
But not the exact question?
Not the exact question, no. And the reason that we have to secure the exact question, then let me tell you our plan for the future. Currently, in Utah, our resources are really limited. And in order to have a secure test, you have to secure all of the test questions. But our goal as we move forward is if we can get more resources, would be if we have enough test questions, thousands and thousands of test questions, then we hope to just have it available for everybody to see. Because, if there's 4,000 questions to choose from, the security is very different than when every student gets the very same question. Yes?
First, thank you, Judy, for being willing to take the time to come here and talk with us. Actually, one of your slides.
No, we can't hear.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, Judy, for being willing to take the time to come here and explain this to us and to answer our questions. My earlier question, I don't know if others heard, you said there was a small footprint because the technology has a small footprint, and I'd asked quickly, is this a hosted solution or not? I work in healthcare IT, so data is kind of my thing. And one of the slides actually answered, it said there weren't any necessary secure servers. It was a web-based portal, right? If it's a web-based portal, then that means the data itself then resides with the vendor, is that right, AIR? Okay, but they're a behavioral and social science institution, right? I saw something about psychometric questions and such. What process will we have in place to make sure that the data about our own children, is secure first and foremost, can't be accessed by institutions and things without our consent, and also ultimately, that these kind of behavioral and psychometric questions, psychological questions that are really more healthcare information, not educational information, are protected by the right, legislation. So what standards are in place to protect that?
Happy to answer that. First off, you've got about 5 questions in there. So I'm going to try and answer all 5, and if I miss one, let me know, because I may not remember all of them. First thing, there's a huge misunderstanding about the term psychometrician. People think that psychometrician refers to some type of psychology or the field of psychology. The term psychometrician is a statistician that looks at test results. It's a statistical term. There's nothing about psychology to it. So when I involve psychometricians, for instance, with our accountability system, we're looking at how schools, we're looking at the data on schools in our accountability system. We use a psychometrician, which is an assessment and accountability statistician, to do that work. So there's nothing about psychology in that term, and people have gotten confused by the use of that term. So psychometrician just means a fancy statistician, but I think a statistician is pretty fancy anyway, so I don't know why they needed that name. So that's question 1. Question 2, when we contract with a vendor to deliver an assessment system, and it's just like we've done in the past, we've worked with, lots and lots of vendors. They receive the student information because they do the actual scoring of the assessment. And so after it's scored, then they send that score to the state office. So vendors don't have like big warehouses where they keep student data. They just use it as a mechanism to be able to score the assessment, and then the data actually resides within the state office. You bet, that's absolutely written in the contract. The other thing that's really important, just a second, let me answer this question, then I'll get to others. The other thing that's really important to understand is that all reputable assessment companies, of which AIR is one of many, Logan, I'm going to need you again in a minute. They all have the same process, and they all have very secure, very strict safeguards for that process of scoring the assessments and getting us the data. So it's as secure as secure as it can be as anybody in the business. So that was question 3. The next question, would you get on, I'd like you to go to the AIR website. Just go to AIR, Google it or whatever. Yeah, there you go. Okay, perfect. Okay, now if you'd go up to About, great. Now go down to Clients. There's been a lot of concerns about some of their clients. They're a big company. This is a list of their current clients, alphabetical. You can see American Association of School Administrators, Cancer Society, on and on and on. Just go, they're just a huge company. And so we have contracted with them for the assessment arm, just the assessment part. But you're right, it's a big company, they do a lot of work, they do a ton of work for other people. That's about AIR. Did I cover all 5 of yours?
Just what processes are in place, to keep behavioral testing out?
Okay, our contract with AIR is exactly like it was with Measured Progress back in New Hampshire, exactly what it was with Pearson, I think, had the contract before. Pearson, I think, is still in Iowa. I've got Julie Quinn. Julie, you got to stand up because I keep looking to you to help me with answers. Julie works in our assessment section at the state office. Now I got lost in the question. Thank you, behavioral, okay. So the contract is to develop test questions in language arts, in math, and in science. Just those three, that's all we do, that's all we've ever done. We have never, at the state level, done anything else. It's always just been language arts, math, and science. So, you know, if you have concerns and you think something else is going on, first off, it's not. The contract doesn't include it. We wouldn't want to do it. The legislature wouldn't allow it. State board wouldn't allow it. Frankly, I wouldn't want to do it either, so it's not an issue. Okay, there's so many hands. Let's go with you and then we'll go. Yes?
Yes, is Utah Common Core, the question is Utah Common Core so substantially different from Common Core in other states that it justifies spending the time and money to develop all these questions at once?
You know, isn't that such a great question? We've kind of got this push-pull here, and it's been really interesting. Representative Nielsen's heard this push-pull because I get called on the carpet in front of the legislature all the time. Because on the one hand, we were told very specifically in House Bill 15, which was passed in 2012, to develop a Utah test, which we're happy to do. And you're right, is our core that different from other states? Right now it's not. Could it become different? Yeah, I guess as we move down the road and more, if we can choose to have it different. But a lot of people like the idea of having a test that was really unique to Utah, you know, owned by Utah, controlled by Utah. But at the same time, I get the question, well, can't we compare our student scores with scores in other states? We want to know how our kids are performing as compared to kids in other states. Well, you know, you can't have both worlds. If you want something unique to Utah, then you can't compare because there's nothing to compare. So it's kind of a trade-off. Right now, the choice has been a test unique to Utah, and you know, is it costing more money to do that than if we joined with other states and did it? Yeah. But Utah felt that was important, and I'm happy to provide that. Yes?
Thank you. You had said often in the beginning about all the bids that came in, and there was a clear list of requirements that were checked with each of the bids. Is the list of requirements that you had, that the bids had to conform to, available publicly for us to see? And secondly, real quick, it said on one of the slides that after 10 years, the support was no longer included, or that it included support for 10 years on the system that AIR was building. After that 10 years, is it instance-based if we need support, or is it an annual contract for support?
Okay, again, a couple of questions within that, so if I forget, my mind doesn't work that long. Okay, so the first question.
Is it publicly available for us to see the list of requirements?
Thank you so much. When the RFP was put out to bid, it was made public, and it was out and anybody could access it. And that's a question that I'll check into.
Where?
Where was it available? State purchase. Don't yell at me. State purchasing had it on their website, but what I'll check, I thought we were working to get it on our website, you know, the Sage one I told you about. I'll double check, and if it's not there, I'll get it there, because it's a public document, it's been released. There's no reason for it not to be. It just may have not been moved over, so I'll check into that. So that's one. Second thing.
It said that for 10 years.
Oh, okay. Our contract, state purchasing does not allow you to contract for more than 3 years. Is it still 3 years, or did they let us go 5? 5, okay. So they let us for this to contract for 5 years. So at the end of 5 years, then we would have to put this out to open bid. So the contract's only good for 5 years. So I don't know where you saw 10 years.
It said on one of your slides, it included for 10 years.
No, I think you're looking at you're looking that it works in computers that are 10 years old. That's what that was referring to. contract is only good for 5 years.
So it wasn't referring to technical support with the system?
No, it was referring to technical support in the school.
So 10 years is the
Right. It was referring to hardware support that's available in the schools.
Not for support for the program?
Right, right. Okay, let's see. I took care of you. Now let's go to you. Yes?
Okay,
And then I promise I'll do the one clear in the back.
you keep mentioning the Dallas State Board of Education has very limited funds.
Mhm.
So, how much is this going to cost us with this new testing, since we're not going with anybody else? And how was I supposed to know as a consumer to be looking for this on some government webpage that I'm not really familiar with? So how was I supposed to know to look there that you were looking to create this whole new testing system? And how much is it going to cost us per student and per district?
Okay.
And state?
Again, multiple questions. The first one deals with cost. The money that was appropriated by the state legislature is $6.7 million each year for the assessment system. So that's the money that was appropriated. Your question is, how could I, as a consumer or a private citizen, know about what was going on? First off, certainly the legislature is open, public. It was in all of the papers. I know Lisa, she did stories on it. So it's been pretty public when the legislature first appropriated the money. All of the board meetings are public. They're all on the website. You can see the agenda ahead of time. You can listen to the recording after. The board talked about it, I swear, every month. I didn't swear. Every month for what, 2 years maybe? I mean, every month the board talked about it. So it was very open. It was very public. When it actually goes out to bid, the intent of that process is for vendors to respond. It's not really, the process isn't designed as kind of, to just let people know. It's more about making it available for vendors to respond. But certainly there's been lots of opportunities, between the media, board meeting, legislature, to know about. Yes?
I have a question.
Oh, I promised the lady in the back. Let me do her first, and I promise I'll come to you next.
Jenny Earl, I'm from Morgan area, and I'm pretty sure you guys aren't coming up that way, is that right? Are they doing any kind of, you're just kind of doing a general area? Couple of questions. What's it going to cost my district to implement this? Because I don't know how the school system is here, but we don't have any extra money. And then also, can you speak to the change in the FERPA laws and how this will also change possible usage of my child's information? The laws that have, well, I say laws, but the way that the Office of Education, not the state, but the federal, has changed. Thank you.
Great. God, you guys love these 2- and 3-part questions. So the first one, I'm sorry about not coming to Morgan. We did 20, just couldn't get to every single district, but I'm glad you're able to come to this one. Your second question dealt with FERPA, but the first question dealt with what's going to cost. The appropriation from the state pays for this full assessment system to be available in all of the schools and districts. Now the costs are in having the technology. And one of the big pushes that the state board has had, which I can only applaud, is that they have approved technology standards. Those are available on the website. And those technology standards are to hopefully get every school to one-to-one device-to-student ratio. I mean, that's just the most phenomenal way for kids to learn, because, it's just like, I think back a zillion years ago when I was in school, trying to share a pencil, with the kid next door, or there would be, 3 of us to 1 pencil. Well, that's kind of the way technology is now. Trying to share and only have 1 computer for a bunch of kids, that's pretty hard. Are any of you in here in those schools with 1-to-1? Any of you here? How's that going? You like? What else are they going to say? A superintendent sitting here.
They don't like it.
I went to one of your schools, and I'm so sorry, I can't remember which one I went to.
Went to Centennial.
Centennial, that's right. Oh, it was phenomenal what they're doing, because they have 1-to-1. So when you ask, well, what's the cost to my school and my district? The costs are being able to increase the technology so that kids can really take full advantage, not only of the assessment system, but all the great instructional things that are going on.
So the cost would be an individual computer for every child in our district, and then someone to maintain that? Because that's the problem we've had before, is we get technology, but we don't have enough funding to staff our personnel in order to do the technology itself, so that it doesn't go used like it should.
Exactly. You know, you've just hit it. Oh, I want to take you with me next time I go to the legislature, because what you said is just, no, it is just so perfect. Because it's not just about buying the device, we call them devices now because they're tablets, laptops, whatever they are, but it's all that support to go with it. I mean, the infrastructure, the support, the wireless, all of that takes resources and money, and that's a huge concern.
So
And that's,
I didn't see a cost breakdown. What was the actual cost that we think it's going to, I mean, like number-wise, not just the 32 million we paid out, what we're going to be paying
or
out.
what's addition to
What is
that?
it going to cost us in the state of Utah to actually implement this fully? That's what I'm curious.
You know, and the thing that's difficult to do on cost, like for instance, in Davis District, they already have some schools that are one-to-one. And so they're already doing it. We have other schools that are struggling to maintain 3-to-1, and they're going to need some resources to keep that going. We have some schools that are pretty much 2-to-1. So it's hard to say, you know, it depends on the school and the district and some of their priorities and what they've been able to do with technology. But again, one of the things we so value with AIR is their system is designed to do the widest breadth of oldest computers to tablets and the smallest footprint, so the least amount of tech support, because our schools just don't have it. You don't have the resources. Okay, I promised you. You're next.
Can you do the FERPA question?
Oh, the FERPA
Yeah,
question.
tell me
My
what
apologies.
the law change is and how
Okay.
that could affect my child's information.
You know, with this implementation of this new assessment system, what we do with data, what we're required to report or not, how we handle it, the way we keep student data absolutely secure and protected, no, there's no change. Nothing is different.
Federally, there are changes, correct?
The new,
That law, they changed aspects of that. Yes.
you know, the new FERPA law has made some changes, but it hasn't in any way affected what we do here in Utah. And we won't be doing anything as we move in the future. I also happen to be, besides being over all of the assessment and accountability systems, I'm also responsible for all of our IT and data systems. And so I know exactly what's going on with data, and you know, it's not different. Nothing has changed. Okay, but in the back, you've been so patient.
I'm just on this flyer. You might have answered this already, and I might have missed it. It says it's designed for educators, parents, and other stakeholders. And I think I heard you mention the stakeholders. I just want to know who that is.
Okay,
Who
stakeholders.
it could be and who it is.
Okay, stakeholders is a generic term to mean people that have any kind of interest or care about education. So parents are stakeholders, neighbors are stakeholders, public are stakeholders. When it talks about this assessment system will be helpful to stakeholders, it's because the data that comes out of it and the information. So you'll be able to know, how's this school performing? How's this district
But who
performing?
will be able to know? What's the range of people who are stakeholders?
Well, it's on the public website, so it's available to anybody.
You know, we're all stakeholders, but I think it's not comfortable to feel like just anybody, because we care about, you know, the next door neighbor, might have access to.
If you're referring to access on our public website for school level data, it's public, so it's available to everyone. But I think the reason we're talking about stakeholders, I don't know that everybody cares. And probably when you look at an individual elementary school, you know, you may not really care about an elementary school down in St. George. You might care more about an elementary school here. So that's kind of what it means by stakeholders. So even though we put school level data on the website, the people that probably care and would really go check it out are probably the ones that are the stakeholder that know the school or in the vicinity of the school or something like that. Okay? Yes?
First, two comments and then a question. So first, a psychometrician is actually a statistician that works in the field of psychology and or education. So that's a professional class and a career that actually does deal with psychology. Second, I couldn't find anything in the contract that explicitly prohibited the sharing of data. There's nothing in there that specifically prohibits it. There's a lot about the development of content. Second comment. And third is, I think you've got a story problem here because I work for the RAND Corporation. Anytime we would go about doing something new like this, there would be a huge meta-analysis that would be done to determine effectiveness, and there would be a mountain of evidence. You haven't produced any evidence of the effectiveness of this testing procedure. I can see the promise. I can see the potential for this.
So back to your question, evidence. There's multiple evidence that you may be talking about. One, what is the evidence that computer adaptive testing works? You know, that was the reason that I think the state board was so wise when they did these pilots and we implemented computer adaptive testing in our state. Now, granted, it was a different company. All of the pilots in our state were using, it's called NWEA Northwest Evaluation Association, I think is the name of the company. They're a company out of Washington. I believe they're in Washington State. And so, you know, there were a lot of years that these schools used computer adaptive testing, and it was based on their evidence, on their reports to the state board. They even reported to the legislature multiple times, and I think that's what caught the eye of the legislature, and they were pretty excited about that. So, you know, as far as do I have evidence that computer adaptive testing is a good methodology for assessment, we use the pilots for that. Also, as I mentioned, computer adaptive testing is becoming really quite widespread in a lot of areas outside of, you know, K-12. If you're asking about evidence about the particular ability or qualifications of AIR, again, as I told you, they're already in a bunch of other states doing statewide assessment. I've had opportunity to talk with, you know, my colleagues in all of those other states. Certainly, we did our homework. It's like when you do a job interview, you want to, you know, call on references and kind of get a sense. So we've done that to, as best as we could, determine that they were a reputable company and that they would be able to provide a good assessment system for Utah.
Just to follow on. So the assessment is part of the evidence. So that's the output, right? Those are the outcomes. And I can see that there's promise there. What about the inputs? So the curriculum. My fifth grader brought home a textbook. I was going through the textbook and I thought, where did this come from? And who decided that this was good curriculum? And where are all the other stories that might matter most to him? Who decides on the inputs? And who determined that those inputs were effective?
Okay, as far as curriculum and textbooks, those are all local decisions. And so if you want that kind of information, you need to talk to your schools and your districts. The standards that the state has chosen are standards. So they do not in any way tell our local schools and districts how to teach or what to teach. They're just the standard. So there's a difference there.
Do they really have that latitude, or are they constrained by certain choices that are determined through them?
I think they have a lot of latitude in what they do. Talk to your school and district. They can give you best information about that. Yes?
In the past, when tests have been written, teachers have had the ability to look at the pilot stats after the students have taken those assessments. In as much as you're building these quite similar, will teachers still have that ability to look at those pilot stats to determine questions that have good discrepancy or not?
Yes, we'll still have all of those same, that's the statistician part of this involved for the educators to be involved. So educators from around the state, you know, whoever is interested, willing, wanting to come. Just a second. The second part of your question, if I can remember, is, oh, how does that work? So let's say I have a test of, I think we're going to, what was the last figure I looked at? 20,000 questions or something. So let's say I go to Hawaii and I do a little sharing and they give me 100 items. Well, out of those 100 items, by the time they go through all of those committees and processes I talked about, we'll probably end up with about 50. And the fact that 50 of those questions were used in Hawaii, I don't think makes it a Hawaii test. It's still Utah because I've determined if I like any of those questions, if they'll work for us, and which ones, you know, that we would incorporate. So just know the bulk of the questions, the majority of questions are being developed right here. It's just us looking for cheap's a bad word, less expensive ways to, you know, add in a few items. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure everybody gets a chance. Yes?
Let's say I'm a kid taking a test. If I'm backspacing or changing my mind, does the system keep track of every step that I'm doing? Or do they just track the end result question, answer to the question?
That's a great question. I don't think I've answered that. Do you know what? I don't have, that's a great question. I'll find out the answer and we'll get it on our FAQs.
Because to me, that seems like that would be a lot of behavioral data to be collected.
I don't know that I would call that behavioral data if the kid answered and decided to erase his answer and try another answer. But I don't know if it'll do that. I'll have to find out. Okay, I had one from you. I haven't had one from you. Yes?
I actually have two very specific questions,
Okay.
and I would like a very specific answer.
Okay.
In the initial process, you said that the stakeholders selected AIR as the company. Is there a list on your website that lists every single stakeholder and whether or not they have any connection at all with AIR?
You bet.
Where is that found on your website?
If you'll go to, again, I told you the assessment page, the SAGE, you'll see, I think it's called the 10 most important FAQs, or it's one of the FAQ documents. And in there, you'll find if you go to that FAQ, I produced this for the State Board of Education. So in it, I list the Board of Directors for AIR. I list everyone that was involved in developing the assessment requirements. I also put in there everyone that was involved in making the selection. But you need to know.
On that stakeholder list?
Yeah, we had parents.
Specifically parents.
We had parents on the requirements list, but we did not have parents on choosing AIR list.
The selecting list.
On the selecting
Who
list.
was on the selecting list? Is that
Like
specified on the site?
Yeah, it's on the web. You'll list all the names.
Okay.
And you'll see when you look at that list, because this is so highly technical, we tried to get a pretty broad base, you know, from northern Utah, southern Utah around, but we tried to get people with specific technical expertise because the proposals were really quite technical. We wanted to be able to understand algorithms and all that stuff. Okay?
The second question has to do specifically with the idea of not doing other standardized testing. I lived in another state a few years ago who started the Common Core long before you did and changed to a system very much like this of doing their own state testing. What happened in the first 2 years was they continued to do their standardized testing in addition to their state testing, and their standardized testing scores dropped so much that they then quit giving the standardized testing and would only give the state's testing. I want to know, are you willing to continue to do standardized testing for students who plan to go to college? Because at this time, all of the colleges and universities in this country are still using the standardized testing exams in consideration for entrance. So are you willing to put this side by side with those standardized tests and give both tests and see how the outcomes and the assessments show the student performance?
You know, this is so awesome, and you can thank the state board. I think Kim had to leave early. You can thank the state board, you can thank your legislature, because they just, working together, state office, support and ask, and the state legislature coming up with the money. This last session, they appropriated money for every student in the state to take the ACT, and to take ACT, Explorer Plan, I'm going to say.
I'm asking about prior to getting to the ACT, 5th grade, 8th.
Okay, let me finish. Explore is in the 8th grade, and Plan is in the 10th grade, and ACT is in the 11th grade. And so we'll have that in place starting this coming year.
But nothing in the younger grades.
Okay, it's interesting in the younger grades. It used to be that we had something called norm reference tests that everybody took for the younger kids. You may have heard them. They used to be called the Stanford. Utah did that lots and lots of years ago. And then we did the Iowa. That's another name for it. It's interesting to see what's happened in the assessment world. States aren't administering those tests anymore. And nobody is. That's why Utah, who used to do the Iowa, we walked away from it because the idea that you've got a standardized test, if nobody's taking it, it's not really standardized. And so those types of norm reference tests really aren't being administered anymore. But I think Explorer Plan and ACT is going to give us a great comparison to what's happening in Utah with what's happening in other states. Okay, yes?
I have a student who had a 504 plan. I currently homeschool because he was not having his needs met the way he needed to in school. Don't fault school. I think the system's broken. That's just my opinion. I want to know what evidence you have that adaptive testing is okay for students who are in special ed, and what system you have in place for those students to opt out of those programs.
I think computer adaptive testing, from everything we've seen from the evidence from our pilots, is that it is, what would I say, a more fair or more productive way to test for kids with special needs. Because now the test is based on their knowledge and their skills, and they're not forced to sit in front of a test that may just not be right for them. That's one of the things.
Continues on that frustrates them. My kids have taken these tests, and it has taught them to hate learning because they don't end.
All I can say about that is what we have heard and what we have seen from other states that have implemented computer adaptive testing is they have felt it's a better experience. Their students have much better experience in the computer adaptive world than anywhere else. That's just what we have been told and the evidence we have collected.
How do you opt out?
Oh, as far as opting out, certainly we've always had in the state, if parents don't want their students to participate in the test, that's always been a parent option. Parents have handled that a couple of different ways. One, they just keep their student home that day. Another way they've handled it is to work with the school and say, I really don't want my student to take the test, and they work that out with school. So that's kind of a local issue between the parent and the school. But, nothing new. That's always been the case. Yes?
I believe Mr. Desi said there's no opting out of these tests.
You believe what?
Mr. Desi said there's no opting out. There's no opting out, and if your student's home, they'll take it when they come back. And if they're gone 10 days, they're out. So is that true, we can opt out, or can we not opt out?
If you've talked to Mr. Jesse, you've probably been at another meeting.
I haven't talked to him.
Okay, so how do you know he said that?
My sister went to that meeting. She lives in Utah County.
Well, first off,
Is that a problem?
no, I guess the reason I'm questioning it because that's not what he has said.
But he did.
And if he did, it must have been understood because both he and I have been very clear that it's always been the case.
Okay, so
If,
you're saying
you
we
know-
cannot. That's just my question. We are allowed to opt out of these tests if we don't want our students.
Parents are parents and parents have choices.
Okay. Is it illegal?
Keep in mind, however, here's the other caveat to it. Right now, state legislatures passed a law that says 95% of students have to take the test or you'll get a failing grade. So if you have a lot of parents in the school that choose to opt out or not participate, and that school doesn't get 95% participation, then the school will get an F. So that might be kind of a problem. Okay, yes.
Real quick, is it possible to opt out of the collection of my children's data from being used outside of Utah? They can still take the test as long as that information stays here.
Okay, the question is it okay to opt out of my students' data being used or collected or whatever? Because there's been so many questions about data, I've asked my data folks to put together kind of a document that can really clarify that and be really clear about that. So I'm hopeful that we can get it done the next couple of weeks and have that on the web. What we do with data. First off, data starts at the school. That's where data is generated. And then data comes to the state office. And we house it at the state office and we use it for reporting purposes. And the kinds of things we do, you can see on the gateway on our public website. We can report graduation rates, and we can report achievement, and we can report growth, that kind of thing. Now, we do, what do we do with the data outside of Utah, I think is your question. One of the things we do with data is we are required to report to the federal government certain amounts of data. But it's not individual student data, it's aggregate data. But we do have to send them information about our students here in Utah. Another thing we use it for, one of the things that's kind of hot right now is being able to collect what's happening in public school, K through 12, with what happens to kids after they graduate from high school. Because a lot of people want to know how many of our kids are going on to college, or how many of our kids are going into UCAT, which is Utah College of Technology. So we get a lot of questions like that. So we're currently in the process of trying to work on a system that would allow us to make those connections so we could say, you know, this is how many kids that's happening to. In fact, the governor, I don't know if you're familiar with the Governor of Prosperity 2020, they've got this big initiative now where they're wanting to have, I think it's 90% of third graders reading on grade level, 90% of our high school students graduating, and then I think it's 66% of our students leaving high school and going on and getting some type of certificate or college degree or something. And so that's what we're currently working to do, is to be able to share that data with higher ed to be able to answer those questions. So, you know, your question, can I opt out from my students' data being included in those kinds of things? Currently, you know, I don't have processes to do that.
I'm more just concerned about personally identifiable information leaving the state. That's what I'm.
Yeah, we don't share student identifiable data.
I was at the school board meeting when we talked about when that was changed to being accessible. And they said, oh, we're actually tightening it up. And it wasn't tightened up.
You said what was to be accessible?
Personal data. Personal data. Identifiable.
Data history.
I was at the meeting when it was changed. Pete, you were there.
Yeah, I was at the board meeting when that happened. Basically, the regulation change for the United States FERPA law did authorize release of personally identifiable information to a list of about 5 federal agencies, troubling agencies to some of us, and because it said personally identifiable, we were worried. It seemed a violation of maybe the Utah FERPA law. It doesn't say that we have applied it yet, but in fact, for a time, the Davis policy said the same thing as the federal regulation change said. Now, whether we're doing it or not, how would we know? We
It
don't
should
know.
have been Davis, and Mr. Cannon knows, because our board put in place a piece to that that said, if anyone asks for personally identifiable information, we have to ask our board if that's okay, right, Mr. Cannon?
Yes.
We made sure that was.
Why not the parents?
Well, you know,
We won't share it, and unless they tell us.
I don't know all, all I can tell you is the policy we have at the state office. And that policy is we do not share personally identifiable data with anyone. The only place that that's available is as parents. You can go into your student information systems with your password and you can access your kids' data.
What protection is that there? There's a state law that you have to get parental permission to divulge private information.
What personal
Yes, so I don't do that.
information do you mean? So when I say that, I only mean like the military can ask for names and addresses and phone numbers of students, unless parents have opted out of that in the first of the year, and then we never disclose it. But there isn't anything else beyond that that I know of that anyone's ever asked for that we never shared.
Yes.
Ever.
Well, a great example of this is State Superintendent Menlove, when this last ACT scores were released, and we had a bunch of kids that got perfect scores, 36, and he thought it would be great to be able to just send a personal letter to the kid and congratulate them from the state superintendent, thought that would be cool. Well, we don't collect data that would allow him to do that. I mean, we don't have addresses, we don't have phone numbers, we don't have any of that stuff. We don't even collect it, it's not even in our database. So, just a second, let me grab her
That's
now.
the ACT, not your test.
What?
That information will be in your test. That's the ACT, which you don't own, not your test.
My test doesn't have that.
So this school test, there will be information there. Are you able to guarantee that AIR, who has the database, is not releasing that information to anyone else?
That's right.
Anyone else?
If they did that, it would be so highly illegal, they'd all be in jail and they'd have huge lawsuits.
Allows them to do it.
No, FERPA does not allow that. It doesn't allow that. Yes.
Park City has already been implementing Common Core. I have friends in Park City where their children have been asked questions about their economic input from their family, how much money they make, what kind of a home they live in. They've also been asked for DNA samples.
No, that didn't happen in Park City. I don't believe that. Well, we'll choose to disagree on that one.
And they've been wearing bracelets on the tracking device, and the parents were not opted, they were supposed to opt into the parents, instead it was an opt-out, which is illegal according to the state code. So they are collecting data on our children that has nothing to do with your name, address, and phone number.
Park City is doing that?
Yes.
I don't believe that. I'm so sorry, I don't believe that. Do you have a question? Don't tell me I'm collecting DNA on somebody. Okay. Okay, just a second. Okay, now wait, let me tell you, I love to answer questions, but if you just kind of want to talk to each other and grumble amongst yourselves, then you don't need me here for that. Go ahead. Judy has a question. I've given her the floor.
Us students have to stick together. There's lots of questions about personally identifiable information. On the computer adaptive testing, is Sage having access to John Smith in 3rd grade in Kaysville, or do they have student number 12345 did this on the assessment? Because I hope everyone understands that the state uses a unique identifier information.
That's all they have is the unique identifier.
And there's no way for them to connect the identifier with John Smith from Kaysville?
But the point is, the whole purpose of Sage having this data is to score the results. That's all they're doing. They don't need any other stuff. They just need, this is what they got right, this is what they got wrong. They score it, they send it to us. They don't have any need for all of that other stuff, and they don't use it.
We trust you and love you.
Oh, thanks.
So what if Bill Gates asked them to sell him that information?
Well, it's like, what if somebody asked me to give away my child? Does that mean I do it? No.
That's what we're saying.
I'm saying you have to understand there's contracts, there's state and federal laws, there's all the protections in the world. People can't just do that kind of thing. For instance, what's going to stop your bank from taking your money and giving it to somebody because they think they need it? Can your bank do that? What protection do you have?
because the laws are in place. The thing we're worried about is that the laws are being changed.
Well, the current laws are in place, will protect you, I promise. Okay, anything else? Are we done? Okay, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Yes?
Okay, I'm just a parent, and I may not be smart. I'm assuming, but I am not understanding how this SAGE test is coming up with what am I trying to say here? If every test is different for every child, how are you keeping it standardized? That just doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
To me, when each question facilitates a different question, how can you say that there's a norm or a common, or if you have 2,000 questions?
Okay. How do you score a test when the students all have different kinds of questions? That comes back to, as educators develop the test questions, as they determine the correct answers, as we bring folks together to determine the level of difficulty, then this is called an algorithm, an adaptive test algorithm. That's the one that determines what questions a student gets and how to score it. It's kind of a back-end technology thing. You're wondering, how does that work? I don't know. It's just worked in a lot of places, and people have felt really good about it. In fact, the one gentleman, oh, he's still here. He came up when we had our little break, and he's a doctor and said they use computer adaptive tests a lot with in medical education kinds of things, and it was pretty good. Okay, yes.
So I had an earlier question that you should.
Oh. Oh, whether the system keeps track. What I'll need to do is I'll need to go back and research that out, and then I'll put it on the web. Contact me, judy.park@schools.utah.gov. Let me give that to you again. Judy, JUDY.PARK@schools.utah.gov. Okay, yes. Here, let me bring you the mic. They can't hear you.
One of the questions I'm concerned about with all the data, and I too come from a different state, so I can see some where it's taken them. I come from Florida, where just to get into a public university, the acceptance rate is about 31%, up to about 50%. And I looked on the internet, and that seems to be the norm for the East Coast, parts of the Midwest, the West Coast. This corridor, Utah, Arizona, we still have pretty high acceptance rates in our universities, but that's probably going to change in a few years as more and more people are going off to college. And with all of this testing, to get into these public universities, you now need to have an average of about a 3.9 GPA and high test scores. So everything is about test scores, test scores, test scores. And I'm afraid that this is going to predetermine my child's academic future. With all this test data, people are obviously looking at it, studying it, and they're going to decide who gets into what program. For example, in the high schools now, it's not good enough just to be an A student. You now have to be in the AP track and be an A student, and that's not good enough anymore. You got to be in the IB program and have a straight A student. It just doesn't seem like you can ever be good enough. But with all of this test data, I'm really concerned about that they're going to look at it and say, not an AP track, not an AP track, VOTEC track, and they're predetermining who's going to get into the college and what that's going to be for her future. So,
Okay, in answer to that question, first off, that's higher ed. I don't have anything to do with that. I do know that the assessments they use are the college entrance assessment, like ACT. Those are kind of the assessments they use. They don't use like K-12 assessments. They do look, I don't know if they use AP scores for accepting kids to college or not. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know much about that. Yes?
I was a transplant from Texas back in the 90s here for a little while, and I have run for the school board in Dallas, and I do want you to know that records are shared and they can be used against you, because they were. I was astonished, and that's what got me involved in this movement in the first place. So when I moved to Utah, I helped co-author this Utah's Family Educational Rights to Privacy Act. And I would like to know, because you said earlier that there is no behavioral indicator assessment. However, when I was researching this and I did FOIA the test, and I did look at the test at the time, the state and across the nation are testing not only in the cognitive domain, but also in the affective domain. So based on what you said about this test, are you saying that Utah is no longer going to be doing that?
What test are you referring to? I don't know what test.
The test, the CRT test, the test that was brought in during the 90s.
So you're saying the CRT test had
Yes, and the NAEP test does the same thing. They test.
Well, I don't have anything to do with the NAEP. I can't answer that. The CRTs, they've been around forever, and they've only had ever language, arts, math, and science questions. They've never gotten into any kind of
I guess that
anything
depends
else.
upon what your definition of the affective and cognitive is.
She's from another
Maybe
state.
so.
They do get
Maybe
questions.
so. I don't know. And here I know
I'm
that.
saying that I did review the test, and I also have a curriculum, and I can show it to you.
Sure, I'd love to hear more about that. Judy.park at schools.utah.gov. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. Okay, yes.
I just have a question. I was concerned about one number, you that 95% number. Does that number include all possible students in the school district? Davis County has a very large homeschooling community. Are those students counted, and does that put in pressure on districts and state legislators to change the Utah's homeschooling law?
No, it wouldn't have anything to do with that. It's the students that are enrolled in the school at the time the test is administered.
That 95% is just the students that are enrolled
In the school at the time it's administered. That's really important because, kids kind of come and go.
Right.
I'm interested in control of the question database. The contract we have with AIR seems to be to manage the test for us. Will they have any say as to which questions are kept in the database and which ones are removed? Rotation of questions, new, more modern questions being added in future years. Do they have any say in that? Or do we have a person in our organization ourselves, in our state, who is the dictator of all questions at the test, or a committee of some kind?
The thing that's so great, certainly I'm over the assessment. We have an assessment director. I wouldn't call us the dictators of the test. That's why we try to use so many groups, and that's why it's vetted in so many ways. That's why our district assessment directors are also heavily involved in the process. Certainly, any decision that is made, anything that is done, is the decision of Utah. So the AIR company, even though they'll help manage all of this, they don't make those kinds of decisions. We have to make those kinds of decisions. But certainly, I wouldn't do it. John wouldn't do it. We would involve educators in making those kinds of decisions. We had one comment earlier about being able to look at the stats of the questions. It's the educators that we bring together that review the stats that make those decisions about this is a good question, this is a bad question, those kinds of things. Okay? Yes?
With the changes in the math, and is that going to, as far as taking an entrance test to college, like ACTs, you got this weird math that you're going on right now, and how is that going to, they're not going to be able to pass the math in ACT, and so they're going to get a low score and be able to get it, they're going to have to be placed in lower classes in college because this math is just not algebra, geometry, trigonometry like it normally should be.
I know there's been a lot of concern about math, and let me just give you the qualifier. I'm not a mathematician. Don't have a math teaching certificate, but let me tell you what I've heard from educators who are. We have seen, looking at our math data now over several years, a pretty alarming trend. We see kids doing well in math as they kind of move through the system, but we see that once they get to pre-algebra, you have less kids being proficient, and then algebra, even fewer students proficient. On to geometry, that's kind of a outsider a little bit. But by Algebra 2, our proficiency rates are dismal. And as we've tried to look with this, and we brought together a lot of math teachers trying to figure out what's going on. Why are our kids, as they're moving through the system, why are we losing so many? And they're not getting into higher levels of math, they're not doing well, they're not being proficient. And, you know, as we've talked with all of these groups and we've kind of examined this, what we think one thing would be, and you know, there's a million causes for everything, but we think part of it is that kids don't fully grasp the information and then they move on. And then they grasp a little less and they move on. And with this new core, what we've done is instead of that idea of we only learn about pre-algebra and then we only learn about algebra, then we only learn about geometry on up, is the idea that starting early on, they learn about all of it. Because, you know, in life, when I have a problem I have to solve, I don't think, is this pre-algebra, is this geometry, is it algebra? I think, how do I solve the problem? And so, by moving to this idea of integrating it a little more, is the idea that kids will be exposed to all of it in a more kind of, I'm not sure if I'm using the right terminology, holistic sense. And they won't have that year lag, because when you go from algebra and then you go to geometry, which is so very different, and then you're back in Algebra 2, they've forgotten a lot of things in Algebra 1 that they really need to be successful in Algebra 2. The educators we've talked to so far that have implemented it, that are using it, some of our schools are now in their second year of using these standards. They've seen a huge increase in student math ability. They have given us a lot of positive feedback about it. There's also a misconception that now there's no longer calculus, now somehow there's a ceiling and kids can only go so far, and that's not true. There's still calculus, kids can still achieve high levels of math.
You can only take your
Yeah, I have an example of that. Can I share my example?
Sure.
My daughter is, she's good at math, so she was in algebra in 7th grade. Now my daughter was able to take algebra in 7th grade.
And so now she's a sophomore, and she's planning on doing AP classes and stuff, and getting college credit junior and senior year. But under the new Common Core system, you can't complete algebra really until 9th grade, and so that opportunity would not be there for her under the new system.
It's slowing the kids down.
Yeah, it's slowing her down. It wouldn't have been possible under this new system for her to do that.
Not decreasing.
Are there any math educators in the room? Like I said, I'm not a math educator.
Yeah. Let me take that for a minute.
Let me just tell you that I'm a math person, and what research shows is that we have pushed our kids in math so hard that they get sick of it, and then they stop about their sophomore or junior year. Then there's a gap between that and when they go to college, and you forget it if you don't keep doing it. And so we don't want to push math down their throats so much that but the research shows that's what's been happening in America. Furthermore, we haven't been giving the kids a really, really strong foundation in number sense. They can give you the right answer on a worksheet, but that doesn't mean they know how to do it. So when it gets into higher level and problem solving, then it doesn't work. Furthermore, the Business Coalition has said, you're giving us kids that can't think. And we need kids that know how to solve problems and that can explain how it happens. So this new math is not, it's really just different strategies and ways to help kids learn it, internalize it, be able to explain it, and understand it.
So what
Do
about
you hear if parents can help their kids with their homework?
I'm Alan Jacobson. I'm the high school math supervisor for Davis District. And we do have an accelerated program for students coming into 7th grade next year. In the change of the core, some decisions were made and some decisions have been revisited. And we are going to make a way for all students that are truly gifted and ready to reach calculus as a junior.
But is that only for the kids who start next year?
So if I have a seventh grader now who's out of luck.
We are also creating curriculum for 8th grade so that we will catch those kids in the in
We're
between.
creating a way that all students can get what they need in their math classes, in their math courses. The big concern and question we have is to ensure that not just that they get calculus as a junior so they can get their college math out of the way, but that we create 4-year students taking math. Because colleges report that's a better indicator of success in math in college. Not what level, but that they took a good math class for all 4 years. So our goals are really to help every student be successful and take 4 good years of math. For some, that will be calculus as a junior. For others, it will be the normal secondary series by the time they're a senior and be done, so that they'll be ready for college in their careers.
Where has this math program been tested? Because it seems like our kids are the guinea pigs, and I'm concerned with that. The math program was tested. I have a first grader who's learning subtraction by having to take the bottom number and adding up to 10, and then taking those two numbers and adding them together. Instead of just a simple subtraction, he's trying to learn abstract math concepts when he hasn't had any experience with just adding and subtracting. And to me, it seems like backwards thinking. I don't know how that method's going to work when he gets a longer set of numbers, 3-digit, 4-digit, it doesn't work. And so where has this been tested, this math program, this Common Core, where has that been tested? I need to know that.
That's Singapore math. And that's
No, he had Singapore math last year.
I'm not an expert on the elementary curriculum. If you want to ask me a question about high school curriculum, I can speak to most of that.
Excuse me, before it's been implemented in the entire state, where are the studies? What class, what group of kids have had this program tested with them? Where is that evidence?
Okay, I'm going to take that back as a question that you want more information on.
Had we
and
studied
we'll
it
get
before
there.
we implemented Common Core? I guess that's my frustration.
I have a question relating back
Okay.
to why you're here.
Now keep in mind, I'm the assessment person. And I love to talk about assessment because that's what I know about and that's where my expertise is.